these people came along and decided that they want to build a machine god, and then they end up stealing data, killing the environment, exploiting labor in that process.
Why do tech execs think that every AI model has to be this massive, resource hungry machine? Whatever happened to the little guys? The India AI Impact Summit is leaning in hard on concepts that are important, but also often co opted. So, in partnership with AI Now and the Aapti Institute, we've produced a series of interviews with some incredible people who live and breathe actual substance, analysis, and meaningful action into these concepts. In this interview, I'm talking with Dr. Timnit Gebru about Frugal AI. So, this idea of using more efficient models comes up a lot in spaces like the summit. So, we're going to talk to Timnit about what it should mean, but probably also how people in power will use it in conversations in the next few weeks. Timnit Gebru is a computer scientist, an incredible researcher on AI and algorithmic bias, and founder and executive director of the Distributed AI Research Institute. So let's get into it. So the upcoming AI summit, yet another sort of geopolitical moment where we're saying every nation, state, and civil society and organization and company and their brother and sister should come to one place and have big, meaningful conversations about AI that are going to shape the politics of these systems moving forward. It's a moment to sort of take stock on some concepts that start out maybe being useful and then kind of get used in ways that make them increasingly lose that meaning because they aren't maybe used in good faith sometimes, but also I think used with precision. You, for years, have been challenging the concept that for AI to be useful, it has to be gigantic and kind of hungry hippos, every piece of data globally, every energy source, every amount of water, every amount of sort of cultural thing of value in society. I wanted to talk to you about this idea of frugal AI, which is a thematic area within this AI summit, because it's something that you've earnestly, I think, intentionally tried to work on to like make a possible path forward of taking advantage of some of the innovations that we have seen, but without sort of sacrificing them at the altar of these sort of empirical, like capitalistic way of thinking about how are we going to build everything bigger, better, and controlled by like 7 people. So do you want to talk a little bit about frugal AI and what it means to you and sort of how you think about low resource intensive AI?
Sure, yes. So, as you know, AI is not like a coherent set of methods or technologies, right? There's a whole bunch of things that go in and out of being called AI. And right now, AI is synonymous with these chatbots and, or image generators or generating some videos or code or something like that. And I'm just not into that as a whole. I'll just say I'm just not into that. But within the field of AI, I believe there are, within all these disparate things that are lumped into AI, some of them I think are useful. They're legitimately useful techniques, legitimately useful ways of doing things, and or products and tools that we can have. One example of that is speech transcription. Automated speech transcription is a very useful thing for many reasons. This is a very well defined task where the input is speech and the output is text transcribing the speech. So it's very well defined: input speech, output transcribed speech. And for all these discussions about AI, um, and we have a lot of cultures in the world that have that are oral cultures, right? So sometimes you don't want to interact digitally by typing or something. Maybe you just want to interact with these things, different devices via speech. Or sometimes you want to control certain machinery with your speech. And so for anything like that, for any speech as an input to be understood or to be able to command some sort of tool, we have to have automatic speech recognition. So for years, speech recognition has been a specific topic, specific work, and then of course now we're in the age of use as much data as possible, use as big models as possible, and don't just try to have one task that you work on. Try to do everything all at once. Try to create a digital machine god kind of paradigm. That's where we are. So I want to give you an example of what has done for speech recognition, right? So for speech recognition, sure, there were issues with it. So sometimes the output would be erroneous. There would be some mistakes or whatever. But this idea of so-called hallucinations, I know not a good term, was not a problem with speech recognition, right? You didn't have an issue where the output, the text, transcribing the speech was a whole bunch of just made up. Fast forward to 2021, OpenAI has something called Whisper, which is supposedly a speech recognition model and also a translation between different languages. It's like one giant model that does a bunch of different things. It's been integrated into ChatGPT. And now we hear that doctors are using Whisper to transcribe patient notes. Whisper has been found to make up a whole bunch of things. So instead of transcribing your speech, it makes up a whole bunch of stuff. Some of these examples were so bizarre. Like there was a speech that said, that, I think that he was wearing a necklace, and then it's transcribed to he was holding a terror knife and he killed a bunch of people and all of that, right? And you're not saving the original data because you don't even know what the speech is. So this is an example of this whole one giant model for everything approach creating problems in tasks that existed from before. If we had a separate kind of approach where we say we care about speech recognition for different languages, and the approach has to be different for different languages. The way we evaluate systems has to be different for different languages. Right now, in natural language processing, which is kind of the field that encompasses a lot of different things related to creating tools for different languages, there are a few metrics that are used to test whether whatever you're doing is accurate. So, for example, there's one metric called the Blue score, which compares word by word from the expected out your model's output with the expected output, and it kind of calculates the difference between these words, right? Now, it's very clear to me that this Blue score was created with English in mind, because when you look at there's some other languages, like my native language is Tigrinya. For one word, you can literally have up to 50,000 variations of that word, because all conjugations are changing that one word and things like this. And now, if you evaluate a machine, a system, like let's say speech recognition or some kind of other system for this specific language using the Blue score, you're not going to be very accurate. You're going to be evaluating sort of the wrong things, right? And so, this idea that we can just use one way of doing things for everything in the world, one giant model for everything, not only, as you mentioned, just guzzles everything in the environment, but also has introduced problems we didn't even have before, and also results in subpar tools for many people around the world.
I think it's a really great way of thinking about essentially, if you don't start with the actual thing you're trying to solve for, you end up doing a bad job at everything you're trying to do. So sort of starting with these general purpose things and saying, "Isn't it wonderful we have a universal tool?" That's kind of a fool's errand, and actually we should be looking specifically at whether or not a tool performs functionally very well in a particular environment and get better and better at that, and that we're wasting time almost, like, trying to build this universal tool. This feels very clear to me and sensible, and also feels like a nice way of reconceptualizing some of the problems and, like, reframing some of the questions that should be asked and replacing some of the questions that are currently feel like they're being asked on these global fora. How has this message been received? I mean, do you feel like this has changed over time and people's understanding that context specificity is essential to actually finding value in these tools? Or do you feel like the industry push to have everything be universalizable because it allows for a concentration of power? Do you feel like that's still the kind of dominant frame of these things?
It depends on who we're talking to, right? So, for example, the industry has absolutely no incentive to look at less resource intensive things for anything, because they view their stealing of data and using private data as a competitive advantage because they have all the data. And some of them view the fact that they can outdo anyone with respect to how many GPUs they buy or how big their data centers are as a competitive advantage. So there's not going to be any research in these kinds of places of how to do something super efficiently and then produce and give that research away to other people. That's not going to happen. On the other hand, there is a parallel movement. So I'm not looking to those big players for any kind of inspiration here. On the other hand, there is a parallel movement of different groups, different small organizations to do this kind of thing. So, one example that I think many of us talk about is Tehiku Media in New Zealand. So this organization all the way in New Zealand just focused on Maori language from everything they do, right? They gather data with Maori language revitalization in mind, and people are very excited to participate in that data gathering process. And so they built the speech recognition system, one of the kinds of systems I was talking about earlier, for Maori language. So they gathered this data. An American company wanted to license the data, and they said absolutely not, because everything we do has to serve the Maori people first. And also they said that, you guys kind of beat this language out of our grandparents, and now you want to sell it to us as a service. Yoni from Tehiku Media often talks about a language back campaign that is similar to the land back campaign. The idea being that a part of the technology that is based on a specific language should first and foremost serve the speakers of that language. And that means also the revenue gained from that technology, because of course they're getting the data from the language speakers. In terms of data sovereignty or licensing, they kind of came up with the specific protocol based on Mara language, right? And then they also built a platform to help speakers of smaller indigenous languages create tools that serve them. So all of this is very inspiring for me because one, they're not trying to build the one machine god that rules them all. They're only concerned about their own language, and they're supporting other people in building their other tools. And when you hear about what they're doing, you can look at aspects of what they're doing and adopt it to your context. And so there's a bunch of different groups like that where we talk about our different approaches. And so, for example, we at Dare, we're building our own cluster, which is, think of it like a small data center, because we don't want to use cloud computing resources, and we want to support our peers who don't want to use AWS or Google Cloud. And we found that from our analysis, a one-time investment of, let's say, $400,000, which is a lot, that would give us an equivalent cluster of that would have cost us almost $2 million per year to use in cloud computing services, right? And so the question is that we want to answer, and some other people are thinking about, is like, how can I, with my cluster, and then, Teku Media with their cluster in New Zealand, and some other people who don't even use their GPUs that much. How can we share resources across all of us, right? And pool our resources to support each other. This is a very different kind of paradigm than whatever big tech is pushing. And not looking to big tech to push a different paradigm, but there is an alternate sort of ecosystem that's building around this idea that no, we don't have to do the same things that these people are pushing.
Love that. I also think there's something about context specificity and this kind of small network building around resources is a form of pluralism. And I think hegemony hates pluralism. So there's something like, it's not like explaining the logic of that is going to make sense to like the monopolistic hegemonic machines that are like, no, 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 just like do everything the same so that we can own and control it. I don't understand. Like, what are you trying to do here? So it makes sense to me that you're not trying to, this isn't an influence operation. This is a, let's do things the way we want, rather than ask for support from people who functionally can't understand what it is you're trying to do. So that makes loads of sense to me. So, what do you see as promising approaches of proactively supporting these small language model projects around the world? I know you're involved in different initiatives that are trying to make that possible. And do you want to talk a little bit about optimistic approaches to governance you've seen? So, sort of things you've seen that excite you in terms of how communities are managing control over these models that they're building?
I can give you an example of what I'm trying to do and the motivation for it. So, I collaborate with a number of small language tech organizations. Teku Media is just one of them. There's one called Lesan that focuses on Ethiopian languages, and there's another one called Ghana NLP that focuses on Ghanaian languages. And from speaking to both of them, I found that they both had kind of similar complaints. One is that when OpenAI or Meta or something comes with an announcement of a big model. So Meta came out with an announcement of a model called No Language Left Behind. I know, bad name already. So let's not let's fast forward from the name. And they claimed that there is this one model that performs automatic translation across 200 languages, including 55 African languages, for which there was before no state of the art translation system. And once this announcement came out, a number of potential investors in these smaller organizations that I was talking about literally told them to close up shop. They were like, well, Facebook has solved it and they're eventually going to solve it. So your little puny startup is not going to be able to do anything. Similarly, when they speak to high up people at OpenAI and other places, they basically threaten them by saying that OpenAI is going to pretty much put you out of business soon because we're going to make our models better in your language. You're better off collaborating with us and supplying us data for which we're going to pay you like peanuts, right? So on the one hand, this was happening. Another thing that was happening was that some potential customers would go to them and say, come back to us when you have more languages. Come back to us when you have more linguistic coverage. So imagine your lesson, your contextual knowledge, you mentioned how important contextual knowledge is on a specific geography, on a specific set of languages. Your contextual knowledge is not about South Africa. It's about Ethiopia and that political situation in Ethiopia and how different language groups are treated and what kind of politics is associated with which kind of ethnicity, right? Like this is your specific context. But then what you're being pushed to do by both clients and investors is claim that you are either producing language technology for all African languages and even scaling globally, like it's all about scale, as you said earlier. So my idea was to have a federation of small organizations where they share data amongst themselves, but then for externally, there's an easier interaction between them. So if you want language support in both Ghanaian languages and Ethiopian languages, you can interface with one application interface, right? One API. You don't have to go to like all these different organizations. And perhaps they could also band together and present themselves as a really good competition to these bigger organizations. And at the same time, each of them knows their context so well and they curate data so well. They're not just guzzling everything on the internet. They're really curating data and using low resource models. So you can also have these kind of models that don't just guzzle every single resource that we can possibly have or imagine, right? Like if you don't have the resources on Earth, let's go to Mars and let's go mine some like I don't know, outer space. That's kind of what these people are thinking, right? So that's one of the things I'm trying to do, and really this was very much inspired by us seeing what Tehiku Media has done, not just with their own like Maori language, but also the platforms that they've been trying to build for other language speakers as well.
So we've talked a lot about language, and I'm curious if I could invite you to explore, are there other areas where you feel like small models actually have a competitive advantage because they actually more meaningfully fit context and sort of sharpen the ability of somebody making a technology to actually make a technology that's useful? Like, are there other areas you want to see small models or frugal models be deployed?
I don't think this is a language specific problem at all. I just think this is a paradigm that needs to exist for everything. Everything needs to be built that way. Anything, not even just AI, so called AI, right? When I'm building a transportation device, I'm not saying that this thing is used for one people, 100 people, it's gonna transport helicopters and also just anything is gonna go by sea, by land, by any way you can imagine. We don't do things this way. But in this specific case, because I call it like a secular religion to try to create a machine god that has been pushed in the last 2 decades by various billionaires putting in so much money and funding towards this. We've now been pushed to this paradigm that is ridiculous, that is never going to be safe because you don't even have a well defined task like speech recognition that I mentioned before. The input is well constrained, the defined, the output is defined. We know what the relationship between the input and the output should be. ChatGPT, we have no idea. It can produce any kind of output. It can take any kind of input. It is supposed to be the end all be all for everything. Whereas, if even if my specialty was actually in computer vision, which is kind of analogous to natural language processing in images. So, unfortunately, a lot of bad things are part of computer vision. A lot of surveillance, face recognition, gait recognition, action recognition, etc., which is unfortunate, but also things like plant recognition. or even things like medical imaging, like trying to analyze certain kinds of images and see if where the likelihood of having a tumor might be, etc. This is also part of computer vision, right? And then this case is the same exact thing. You want to create a specific tool for a specific context. If you're interested in radiology, you should just have data in radiology and figure out what you're trying to build the model for, what specific thing you're trying to build it for, right? You're not trying to just build something that you claim will be like a superhuman doctor, right? That doesn't make any sense. To me, this idea of a task specific tool is just a concept in anything we build in engineering. It's not really a new concept. It's just that these people came along and decided that they want to build a machine god and then claimed that they're doing it, and then they end up stealing data, guzzling, killing the environment, exploiting labor in that process. And it's not the frugal AI thing that you're talking about that's new. It's more the flip side of what we've been seeing that's ridiculous and new. And we're just trying to be like, let's go back to basic principles and let's not do something that sounds ridiculous and dead on on arrival.
That was great. I think that's a really good reframe also, because the purpose of this is to reframe. And I think this idea that frugal is new or context specific applications and design is new, it's the opposite is true. It's this idea that you could scale towards general purpose technologies and that that's a path towards social progress or like economic value creation is like batshit. And that's the new thing. So I really appreciate that as a reframe. My last question for you is sort of going back to thinking about the use of this theme of frugal, lightweight, resource responsible AI technologies in something like an India Impact Summit on AI. What's your most ungenerous interpretation as to why that's playing kind of a leading thematic role in what's going on in a summit of this kind?
Ungenerous. My ungenerous interpretation would be, oh, there's an AI race and the US is doing this and China's doing this and India needs to do this. That's my most ungenerous kind of Cold War race rhetoric, which is bullshit for, I don't know if I can say that on this podcast. Okay, cool. For many reasons, many people see through it, right? We need to do chat gpt but with fewer resources, which I'm not pro. I think that that's just not a good paradigm. Why do we need chatbots? We need to both build other things and do it with other resources. When the model DeepSeek came out, I had like two conflicting feelings. One of them was like, exactly, when you are constrained, when you can't get the best GPUs because of export controls, that's when you innovate. When you feel like you have everything is at the tip of your fingers and you don't need to think about being efficient or clever or anything, you're not going to innovate. So, what's happening in the US is not innovation. On the other hand, DeepSeek was still this large language model kind of paradigm. And I'm thinking, why is everybody's imagination hijacked? They could have put that effort into something else and built something that is resource efficient, etc. So it both shows how clever and innovative you can be when you're resource constrained, but also the fact that if your imagination is hijacked, then you're still going to produce that same sort of paradigm when we can have a paradigm shift. My hope is that in this summit, one of our researchers is going to be there. Hopefully, you guys will get to meet too. In this summit, some people can try to redirect some of that energy. I don't know if that's too much, placing too much hope on anything, but I think that we really need to produce content or something to help people unhijack their imagination into something different.
I love that as a frame that like the problem here isn't the idea of context specific, frugal, let's pay attention to resources, let's try and be creative with what we have. That's great. Unless you're saying in order to replicate global north models and a pursuit of scale that is silly and not a good use of resources at all. I think that's a really great way to frame also the first global south country hosting a summit. A lot of these terms get used to draw out, I think, some of those power dimensions between a global majority country and global north counterparts. But if you're not actually going to bring anything meaningfully different to the table, then, what's the point? Like, what do we do? What are we doing? So I really appreciate that as a reframe. And I just want to thank you because I think that the work that you've done for years on this topic has made it feel less like the only concept that's possible is scale, is rapid concentration of power and resources, is industry specific universalizing of tool development, is this pursuit of the machine god. So thanks for all the work you've done and thanks for sharing these insights in advance of the summit.
Thank you for having me. And I'm so glad that you have this podcast because we're being overrun by the manosphere. So I'm just so happy to every time I see other voices that I want to hear. I'm really happy about that. And thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Timnit for joining me for this conversation. This episode is part of a series we're doing in partnership with AI Now and the Aapti Institute called Reframing Impact, AI Summit 2026. And we've got some interviews with incredible guests, and you can find the full series on our YouTube channel. So do check it out there.